what I'm actually saying is that our society is actively trying to infantilize people. It's doing it deliberately for lots of reasons. Our political class, the marketing groups, the market itself. There's lots of reasons, lots of causes of infantilization, and it's being rolled out, and we are the often passive recipients of these tendencies. As I say, so I consider that to be culturally induced infantilization, and that's to say that people are not. I'm not trying to be too pejorative and say, "Oh, you're an infantilized man-child or man-boy," which is what sometimes the press will pick up on. You know, they exist. Don't get me wrong. We could all probably point to one or two of them, but actually, my goal is really a broader kind of a state of the nation. Really, we were already narcissistic. Lash was right, and I think now we're becoming increasingly infantilized.
Du lytter til Københavns Universitets seneste forsøg på at forklare verden. Sammen undersøger vi, hvad vi ved, hvad vi ikke ved, og hvad vi diskuterer endnu. Velkommen til Verden forsøgt forklaret.
Hej, god aften. And good evening, because we'll be speaking English tonight. So welcome to all of you. Wonderful to see you here, and of course, especially welcome to you, Keith Hayward. We're going to talk about infantilization, but your field where you come from is criminology, and it might not seem completely obvious to everyone how those two are related. So how are they related?
That's right. I'm Professor of Criminology at the Faculty of Law down at Sandra campus, and I'm a criminologist. That's my day job, so I write about all forms of crime, from art forgery to jihadism and everything in between, really. But as social scientists, we love to put a prefix in front of our title, so I'm actually a cultural criminologist, so that's an area of criminology that I developed and have been working on over 2 decades now. And so my specialism really is in looking at cultural patterns, trends, and tendencies. So for example, Denmark's a great case study because high trust society, pretty low crime rate, although you need to keep an eye on that, it's rising. But I'm interested in cultural patterns, cultural trends. And so for me, infantilization is in my opinion, is a very prevalent and pervasive cultural trend. So I bring across from criminology those cultural methods, cultural approaches to analyze something that I think is kind of culturally induced at the moment, yeah.
And something that you see traces of in criminology as well, in the field.
Yes, I was drawn to this not necessarily through my criminological work. I was drawn to it through other areas, and perhaps we can talk a bit about those areas going forward. But in criminology, there are elements of infantilization. So, what might I say about this? In prisons, for example, in the UK and the US, prison researchers often refer to certain prisoners in their 20s, use the term psychosocial immaturity. So they're arriving in prisons with very low social skills, can't cook, can't do the basic things that one would expect of somebody at that stage of the life course. So inside prison settings, people are very concerned about the lack of maturity of certain types of offender. Something else I could mention would be when I was researching a book on crime and the media and the kind of relationship between those two fields. I watched thousands and thousands, far too many, video clips. You may have seen them yourselves on your video feeds and TikTok and Instagram, and these things were violent encounters. And to me, they kind of, the more I watched, the more I recognized that they were very anti-adult encounters. They're sort of fits of rage, or a lack of self-control, or impulsivity that takes people into very violent, serious conflagrations. So, you're in a shop, very innocuous kind of exchange between you and somebody, or not us, of course, but a violent perpetrator and somebody else, and it ends up in a really kind of quite serious encounter. And you see that outside nightclubs, you see that in all kinds of settings. And so I started to sort of look at those and think, hang on, with many of these instances, it's a sort of waning adulthood, a lack of self-control, a lack of comportment, a lack of the kind of things you would assume that adults would have. But these are people in their 20s, 30s, and even 40s and 50s in these video exchanges, which are kind of getting drawn into sort of things that I describe in the book as sort of schoolyard antics scaled up for the big city. So those things kind of cross-cut with my day job. But I think generally speaking, this is not a book about criminology or crime, although it does feature at various junctures in the book. It's more a book about trends and tendencies, as I mentioned, that I think many of us can recognize, or you may disagree with me, and that's fine as well.
We'll put that to the test during our conversation here now. As you already heard, Keith Hayward is a professor of criminology here in Copenhagen at the Faculty of Law, and you've published, Keith, both on theory, spatial and social theory, on crime and technological culture. You work on the city and border spaces, on media, as we just heard, and effect. So in these interconnections between sociology, criminology, and the culture we're all in. And here in Copenhagen, you teach criminology broadly, and that's why I thought it would be nice to get a feeling of where you stand, as you say, in your daytime job. But of course, this book is very wide-ranging, and it's a book that centers itself on a really, really fascinating word, which is infantilization. And I think in order to make sure that we know what we are talking about, I think I would really love for you to do a proper sort of definition of this concept you're investigating.
Yeah, it's not an easy word. Even my mother struggles to pronounce the word.
I practiced from home.
Yeah, people do struggle. And my publisher said, "Can we find something else that's a bit more accessible?" But the point is, I really wanted to own the title, own this word in the field. So, I go into this a little bit in the book, but the term infants is in Latin root means before a child can speak, essentially, so before they can articulate anything. Now, in the UK and elsewhere, the word infancy is extended slightly, so it means sort of generally speaking toddlers. And so I quite like the idea of the toddlerization of society is another way of looking at infantilization. But I'll put that aside. I guess the other thing to point out about the sort of transitive verb to infantilize and the words infantilization is that it has a clinical element to it. So many of you may have studied some psychology or some clinical studies, psychiatry, and you may have heard of the term infantile or to infantilize somebody, and it has a kind of regressive dimension to it. So it means somebody who doesn't progress through the life course. And to infantilize somebody would be to treat somebody in who is immature way that is not representative of their stage in their life course. So it's really about this kind of regressive, psychoactive, psychological state where somebody exists. They're older in the life course, but they're existing or acting and behaving as a younger person. And so clinically, that's really what you'll see if you read the books on human behavior and those kind of things. Now, I'm not a clinician, as we know, because I'm a criminologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. So what do I do with infantilization? Well, I take my lead from somebody you may not have heard of, or maybe you have, a scholar, social historian called Christopher Lasch. And Lasch did a similar thing with narcissism in the late 70s. He argued that American society, its materialist, consumerist society, was developing a culture that was narcissistic. Not clinically individuals turning up and with narcissistic tendencies. The culture itself was beginning to become very narcissistic. Now, as it turns out, that was very prescient because he wrote it in 1979.
I think people have been revisiting
him
lately.
Yes, they have, yeah. And Lasch is very famous because President Carter did a very famous speech where he drew closely on Lasch's work. And for me, that's very interesting because Lasch took something that was essentially a clinical phenomenon and then used that to explain and account for behavioral patterns in the United States in the late 70s. So I sort of stole that methodology, if you want to call it that, or theoretical approach. And I say, I want to drag infantilization or the infantile state out of the clinical psychiatric register and into popular culture, so we can understand what's going on around us. When we see these things, we now have a term where we can see, there's something here that may be a wider cultural trend that people, may not even recognize that's happening. I mean, a lot of parents talk to me and say, I didn't recognize what was happening until I read your book. Now I know my kid's infantilized, or whatever it might be. And so I think that's its application at the cultural level, which goes back to my point earlier about my training in criminology. And so, I kind of use the phrase in the book a lot, which is culturally induced infantilization. Now, why that's important is because I'm not here to blame people. I'm not here to blame the next generation. Some bad reviewers of the book, and there have been some, say, well, you're being too pejorative about young people. That's not what I'm trying to do. What I'm actually saying is that our society, and we can talk about this, is actively trying to infantilize people. It's doing it deliberately for lots of reasons. Our political class, the marketing groups, the market itself. There's lots of reasons, lots of causes of infantilization, and it's being rolled out, and we are the often passive recipients of these tendencies. As I say, so I consider that to be culturally induced infantilization, and that's to say that people are not. I'm not trying to be too pejorative and say, "Oh, you're an infantilized man-child or man-boy," which is what sometimes the press will pick up on. They exist. Don't get me wrong. We could all probably point to one or two of them, but actually, my goal is really a broader kind of a state of the nation. Really, we were already narcissistic. Lash was right, and I think now we're becoming increasingly infantilized. And when I say we, I don't mean us, of course, because we're all, it goes without saying, doesn't it? I mean other people. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah.
So, and of course, I think it would be really illuminating to look at some of the examples. You have a myriad of examples in the book, which makes for really nice thinking along. Do you remember what gave you the idea to begin with? Like, was there a certain moment or a time when this started sort of creeping up of you as a diagnosis?
Yeah, well, I mean, let me use this as a public service announcement. This started a long time ago. So I think this book took me on and off about 10 years to write. Not consistently, I did lots of other things. But the initial ideas to produce this text started over 10 years. I think I gave my first paper on this in like 2013 or something. And I suppose the first thing that struck me was turning the TV on and looking at advertisements and how I was being spoken to as an adult. So I remember thinking and comparing how somebody would advertise a car to me and my generation versus how they might advertise a car to my father's generation, which was about very practical things, miles per gallon, engine size. And now, I started to document that car manufacturers were using cartoons. They were using Disney theme tunes. They were using childlike imagery, cutesy jingles, cartoons. I talk about cartoonification of everything in the book. Everything is now a cartoon. Watch out for that on your adverts at TV. I started looking at these adverts thinking, why this? Someone's signing off on these adverts. This is a deliberate policy. So I started looking into advertisers and looking at their conferences and their interviews and finding out that they're actively trying to, they won't use the word infantilize, but they're trying to evoke, in their words would have been, evoke feelings of safety, security, and nostalgia. That's how those people excuse their infantilizing practices. But I thought, well, that doesn't sound entirely true. That sounds like an excuse cognition. Let's dig a bit deeper. And so the more I looked into this, the more I found everywhere I turned, I was being treated like as a child. I remember going to the 2012 Olympics in London, and a tannoy came over. You were being pushed around everywhere. Wherever you went, you were totally, controlled. And people said, "Don't forget to drink. It's a hot day." And I thought, well, I've got this far in life without that kind of advice. It's amazing, really. Thank goodness you're here to tell me that I need to hydrate. Even the word hydrate is kind of patronizing because it's a multi-syllable word. You know, I mean, it's just to give them some sort of sense of seriousness. But they're telling me, and everybody there, to stay hydrated and drink. I mean, why do I need to? Where did that come from? Why is it there? So advertising, health and safety signage. I would go to a gallery. Mercifully, this doesn't happen in Denmark. But if you go to a gallery in England or the United States, you walk through the door, you're an adult, and it will say, you may find some of the exhibits disturbing or problematic. And I say, yeah, it's an art gallery. I want to be challenged. I want to be provoked by art. It's the apex of human achievement. I don't want safety, pacification, bland, childish tropes. I want to be confronted by something serious and adult. And don't tell me what I can and cannot look at. So on and on and on it went. In every sphere of my life, I sort of felt this really. You can sense I'm getting slightly annoyed now. I felt kind of, getting upset by this. And so I do what academics always do, which is write a couple of journal articles. Interestingly, I had trouble getting them published because peer review is not really peer review. Peer review is what can be approved and sanctioned by certain people, and it's another discussion. What's acceptable, and so forth. So I persevered and got a couple of papers published, which nobody really cared about. And I thought, well, I'll leave it there. No one cares. It's just me being angry. And then I couldn't let it go. So one of my favorite novelists is the late Martin Amis, the British writer who many of you may have heard of. And Martin Amis always described his novels as germinating in his mind, and then he didn't want to write them. He said, but the pang of the story, the pang of the theme wouldn't go away. And I suppose, without being too pompous and pretentious, the pang of this subject wouldn't go away. And then people start to write to me with things. And then if you exist in a British university, as I did, which is one of the reasons I left, if you exist in a British or American university, you are confronted every day by infantilizing stories. So let me give you a quick example of my former university, which I won't name.
No one will know how to Google it.
Yeah, well, that's on them. That's not on me. I didn't. I remember receiving an email from my university saying, Professor Hayward, we'd like you to appear in a welcome video for students where you pop party favors and have a balloon on your desk. And I thought, what? I said, I can't imagine, Hannah Arendt be doing this kind of thing. And then about a week later, I said, we're having a research day, and it's going to be called a research sandpit. And you and your other scholars are going to get in the sandpit and be given a sandpit token. And I remember thinking, well, what's happening here? Where is this coming? And of course, I didn't go to either of those things. I refused point blank. And so other people started to send me things from all over Britain and America, mercifully, great material for a book. And so that was that. So it wouldn't go away. Is the answer, long answer. And so here we are. We got with the book. Yeah.
And just, I sort of love. I kind of want to just keep asking you to list more examples because I love your examples. But yeah. I just want to just mention the framework because some of this is fun. The examples are fun. But there's a broader cultural story in the book, and also a story about our political culture, which is not as fun. And maybe before we get into more of the examples, I think it would be good to just talk a little bit about some of the consequences of infantilization that you observe in our political culture as well.
That's the last chapter in the book. I call it pantomime politics, and pantomime in the UK is a thing where children go to and you boo or hiss at characters. It's a very binary, crass, funny, comic performance, essentially. Well, guess what? That's what I believe politics in the UK and the US looks a bit like that today. A kind of booing and hissing spectacle would be the best word to describe it, I think. And so I suppose what I'm getting at when I talk about art, when I talk about health and safety, when I talk about university life, what I'm essentially saying is that our culture is being debased by the primacy of youth. So youth matters above everything else. So adulthood is being denuded, being eroded, and being replaced by something that appeals to a certain demographic. I think it's pretty much deliberate. Now, that has all kinds of impact. I mean, in the art world, for example, which I mentioned briefly, I mean, Jeff Koons is the world's most expensive artist. Jeff Koons' entire oeuvre is childish imagery, Popeye and olive oil, and yeah. So even in our elite areas of society, we see the tentacles of infantilization. But as you rightly point out, Lotte, the damage, the real possible future damage of this is in the political sphere. So I use the phrase infantocracy, rule by children, rule by infants, and I call many politicians infantocrats. And so it might be interesting to talk about kind of some examples of this, okay? So the thing about this is, I hope, if you're supportive of my hypothesis, that you'll start to notice these things everywhere you go. And so this week, there was a story in the British Parliament, the oldest parliament in the world, venerable organization. There was a story in the papers that somebody had hidden a box, a recorder that made sex noises, a parliamentarian in the chamber. And you think, well, that's bad enough. But of course, it was only recently that one of our politicians, one of our MPs, had to resign because he was watching porn in the chambers. In the Norwegian Parliament building, somebody was caught playing Pokemon Go. I think several people were caught playing Pokemon Go. And on it goes. So it's crept into the rule makers, our governance, and so forth. And this is very serious. So, I mean, a few examples. I mean, everybody says, okay, it's Trump. Right. Might see that, he's referring to his opponents with nicknames, giving his penis a name. Can I say penis? It's too late, isn't it? Okay. And Trump, I think he said to Mike Pence once, if you don't support me in this, Mike, you won't be my friend anymore.
Right.
So that's very easy stuff. So it's very easy to sort of pick on Trump, and I don't want to do that. So in the book, I try to be very even-handed, because I don't want to be somebody that's just with one political position here, because my view is it's across the entire political spectrum, and that's what's worrying, okay? So, I mean, Joe Biden, was retweeting the Muppets. For what reason? Maybe because he'd been ventriloquized for 4 years. He had sympathy with stuffed animals. Boris Johnson in the UK, his entire stick was scruffy prefect. He did everything but turn up in short trousers to Parliament, really. His whole thing was this idea of a sort of scruffy schoolboy. Justin Trudeau liked nothing more than putting makeup on and fancy dress constantly. I'd say Rishi Sunak would talk about training shoe collection and his Coca-Cola. And it's just so many examples of senior politicians acting like children. In the last election, Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, I mean, no one really knew what they stood for, but we knew what he was doing, which was going on TikTok and constantly falling off things, falling off a log at a playground, tripping over a fence on a hobby horse, right? Falling off a canoe, doing aerobics, falling over. The whole shtick was a kind of like, I'm so old now, I mean, sort of Buster Keaton reference. I mean, it's a really bit absurd, but it worked. The thing is, it worked. They got lots of seats, and they did really well. And so he's continuing to do it. And now lots of people are doing it. TikTok videos, rap videos. It's everywhere. It's normalized. Our politicians going on celebrity shows. I'm a celebrity, get me out of here. Former Health Secretary Matt Hancock eating camel's testicles on that. I mean, the idea of political class is grace, yeah, and a tradition of being able to articulate problem solving. That's what Weber talked about in 1919, about what the political class should do. They should stand in a position of kind of grace, and we should sort of look at those people as respectfully. I don't understand how you can look at someone like that with respect. They're just grifter politicians doing anything they can to get their faces on videos or get clickbait. And so, this is a kind of, we can laugh at this, and it is quite lighthearted, and the counter-argument would be, who cares as long as I get traction? My name gets traction with the voters. That would be the counter-argument. I think actually it's much more serious than that. I think we're seeing a mass turn-off of the political class. I think people of all political stripes, and of all ages actually, very young people now, they're very, very fed up with politicians and their antics. and their failure to deal with real problems while they're messing around and peddling sound bites and debasing our parliament and so forth. So I think it is quite serious, and and I don't want to take too long with these answers to your question.
No, but this is what I was looking for, because I want to sort of address what one starts seeing after reading this book, looking out at a world which certainly presents very grave sort of challenges for everyone, right? It's not as if we've solved everything, so now we can just go down to the sandpit and play. It seems there's a lot to be solved, which of course raises the question, who wants this? Like, what are then, who wants infantilization? What are the drivers of this? Why would you want politicians to run around like that? Why would you want this? What drives this broader cultural tendency towards infantilization?
Well, the old argument about what's upstream or downstream, politics or culture, I think we could say, I'm not talking about Denmark here. Mercifully, the Danish political class is still pretty adult, and they can get together and they can go across their political lines, and they can, create governments from different political, quite contrasting political positions. So mercifully, in Denmark, we haven't gone down this road, but let's see. But certainly in the UK and the US, they're a terrible political class. In the UK, our political class is the worst since the Georgian period. It's really, really awful. They're not up to the task, really. And so I think the question you ask is, what's causing their behavior? I blame them. I blame them entirely. I don't think they're being pushed in any way. I think they are reflecting a broader infantilized culture. And so I'd say that their antics are downstream from the general culture of infantilization that dominates our world. And so the question then becomes, what causes that?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Well, in the book, I mentioned three things. Okay, I think there are three primary drivers of infantilization. And I'll take them in the order that they come in the book, just for ease of memory. I put a great deal of blame at the door of the market, and in particular marketing and advertising strategies. This is something that's active. If you go to conferences, they'll talk about trying to create a childlike adult consumer. Now, why would they want that? Well, because maturation in the life course means that you don't have the same impulsivity or desires that you had as a child. When you're a child and you see Christmas adverts on TV, you want it. Mum, Dad, I need it, right? It's a real passionate thing. Of course, you grow out of that, don't you? And as you mature, you save, you do other things that come with age, and you don't have the tastes, desires, and so forth. The neophilia, to quote Zygmunt Bauman, which is the love of the new. You don't have that children have. Well, guess what? It's very good if you can inculcate that, if you can instill that into a broader demographic. And so they're actively trying to create this childlike adult consumer. How do they do that? By grafting on to adulthood childish behavior. So I ask you all to check your advertising when you go home and start looking at adverts closely and see how often it's a cartoon, there's toys involved, there's fantasies, there's fairy tales, there's childlike tropes, advertising word, imagery, symbolism in adverts for serious adult things, mortgages, wills, right? I mean, there's an advert in the UK advertising wills, and it was with toys. It's a very strange phenomenon if you stop to think about it. And so, this is a kind of active development. I think the goal is what I would call a uni-age consumerism. And uni-age consumerism is where everybody is interested in the same things. So you can now sell a 10,000-piece lightsaber puzzle or something to a 50-year-old. All right? So you're expanding your market for things that would have previously ended maybe at 16, 18, 20 or so. You keep pushing that back and back, you have a bigger market. An easy way to think about that, a shorthand way to think about that would be what used to be children's movies. They were called children's movies, right? They were taking the kids through a children's movie. Fine. my dad would take me, dragged along, fall asleep, right? Because it's for kids. Now they rebrand these things. They don't call them children's movie, they call them family films, right? And this seems very innocuous, but the idea is that then the family is involved. Then you have some knowing jokes in the Disney movies that appeal to the adult. Then you can sell through that, purchase the thing at home. I've lost track of people, academics, who tell me their favorite movie was Disney or Aardman, and I mean, like academics. I find that almost bizarre that they would sort of pick a movie that's essentially a children's movie, but they say it's okay. And that's the expansion of childhood, that's grafting on childhood values, behaviors, interests, passions, grafting it onto adulthood.
Because children are great shoppers.
They
basically.
are, yeah. They want it.
And when they grow up, they're shoppers
yeah.
with money.
That's right, yeah. And, things are houses are expensive. We're in an economic downturn. And so it's very easy for people to say, I'm not going to save for the future. I'm not going to do what previous generations have done throughout history, which is to plan for a later life, adulthood, pensions. Let's just spend it. Let's just spend the money now on whatever it might be. And so, I think, so that's one active cause. Yeah. I'm very critical about the advertising and marketing industry. And it's not, don't take my word for it. I mean, they have categories called the mook and the midriff. These are archetypes, okay? The mook is a kind of 35-year-old bearded, weirded, kind of bed-headed guy with a ukulele soundtrack, stumbling through life, unable to make any decisions. That's a kind of trope, an archetype. Now, look again at archetypes of actual adults in commercials. Somebody that's old, somebody that's not being pointed a figure of fun. Every adult is the butt of the joke, usually the man, actually. Oh, Dad, don't you know that? Don't you know this? Right? That's fun in a way, but it undermines archetypal imagery for people. Advertising is not causal, but it is a scaffold in a way for our culture. Right?
And same goes for popular culture, right? I think Peppa Pig's dad, if anyone has small children, is also kind of the butt
of all the jokes. Yeah, I mean, that'll be okay if it's Peppa Pig, because you're targeting it for kids. But advertising, it's the dad that can't do this, and everyone has to help the dad out because he's hapless, and the child is the all-knowing sage, And so these are kind of deliberate strategies, and you just take a look at your advertising, and you'll see it. I have countless examples in the book. Okay, so we move on. So the second blame I apportion to our online culture, particularly social media. There's a lot one could say about this, and perhaps I'm already burning through time, so I won't go into great detail. But I think there's two issues with social media that are a problem. One is the way it has. When people are on social media, they're not doing other things. So all the big data sets from America, the huge data sweeps that we have from 1976 right through to 5 years ago, which massive data, it says what do kids do? What do teenagers do? And everything they used to do, they're not doing anymore. They're not going to the mall. They're not learning to drive. They're not volunteering. They don't have part-time jobs, right? All these things. So they're dropping off. They're not getting in relationships. They're not partying. And so we can discuss that, whether or not that's good or bad.
They're not committing as much crime.
They're not committing as much crime. They're not drinking, right? So this is some good things in this, okay? Possibly. Anyway, the point is, what are they doing when they're not doing that? That's the real issue. And what they're doing when they're not doing that is they're online, okay? So their interactions developing through the life course, very important stages of the life course, those formative years when you screw up, make mistakes, learn from life. When they are not doing that in the real world, they're doing it online. Well, online, you can curate that. You can switch it off. You can move on. You can change your interests. And so that, according to various digital sociologists and scholars, can create this world of safetyism, where you're not taking risks. You're not doing what previous generations have done, which is learning from real-life experiences. You're living a kind of very different life to all previous generations in history online. Now, there are good things about that. Don't want to be too critical. But I think this is an issue, all right, which helps infantilization. And alongside that, the other thing that social media does in particular is fuel fantasy. Now, fantasy is something that we all have when we buy a lottery ticket, or when we fantasize about a sexual relationship or something. Fantasy is a good thing, right? Ask a psychiatrist, they'll tell you fantasy is normal. But one of the things about fantasy is that as you progress through the life course, many of your fantasies, they get diminished because adulthood gets in the way of your aspirations.
Right.
Yeah?
You become more realistic.
We know that feels like, don't we? It's sobering, depressing, but it could be very valuable, right? To have this kind of sense of life telling me that I'm not going to be a pro tennis player or a model or whatever it is. You know, it's a sort of way in which I suppose the maturation process is you know, it's good and bad, and part of that is that you have to, you know, mature into a sort of realization of what life is and what your life's going to look like going forward. Well, I mean, one of the things about social media is that it fuels fantasy. The architecture of likes, this scaffolding of support for not just people's personal fantasies, but strange fantasies around politics, conspiracy theories. I mean, conspiracy theories are not new, and of course they're not. But they would have existed in a sort of amongst a strange group of people. You have to search them out, and you have to join a cult or find some maverick figure. But now the conspiracy theory is there. It's there. It's very easy. It's very accessible. So things that would have been fringe can now go mainstream very quickly. Conspiracy theories, many of them are just abject fantasies. Some of them aren't, by the way. I mean, we could have a huge discussion. I used to teach a class on conspiracy theories, and it's very interesting. But anyway, these things are part of the fantasy construction that comes from online. I mean, people's politics themselves can also be a fantasy. So people think that changing their Facebook ident photograph to a je suis, what's the French one?
Charlie Hebdo?
Charlie Hebdo, yeah. Or a Ukraine flag. It's a kind of fantasy of political, doing something practical. It's not really. It's a kind of herd mentality, and it's a kind of a signaling of one's virtue and so forth. So there's a fantasy in that, really. It's not organized collective politics. It's not getting involved, rolling your sleeves up and trying to change the world. It's a kind of fantasy of politics, which doesn't have any traction at all, really, apart from in Meta and Facebook's algorithm databases where they know your politics and they know your psychometrics. So there's all kinds of fantasy-inducing, fantasy-propagating things happening online. That, alongside the safetyism, I think, you know, these are seedbeds of infantilization. And thirdly and finally, I do apologize for these rambling. Can you imagine what my students have to suffer in my class? Actually, I'm more succinct with students because I know their attention spans maybe not quite as long as yours. I shouldn't say that. But the third thing I think that I would blame actively is, you know, I'm not proud of this myself, is the education system. Okay?
Really?
Yeah, not in here in Denmark. I'm delighted.
Really?
I'm delighted. Well, we can delve into that, and I can take questions on that afterwards. But the book, I hasten to add, that the book, Infantilized, is predominantly about the Anglo-American world. It's about the UK, I know, and I know the American society very well. I've lived, worked, and taught there. So I know those very well, and they're further down the line. And so I think I'm talking about Anglo-American schooling and Anglo-American higher education. I think they're very culpable. They may be the primary seedbed of infantilization. Why? Because they should be pushing back against these things. They should be the bulwark against these tendencies. They're not. They've rolled with it, they've amplified it.
In what way?
Well, at schools, all kinds of things are happening. Again, not here. So there's, you know, if you look at what's happening in pedagogy, which is the study, you know, the study of childhood development and education. You have a thing called the pedagogy of motivation, which is very, very dominant trope in that field. What is that? We must motivate the kids because we're kind of competing against everything and TikTok. And so everything's motivation. Well, guess what? Not everyone's motivated the same, right? Someone who may be very motivated by X is not motivated by Y. The job of the adults in the institution, the curriculum designers, is to pass what is required by one generation to the next, what is valuable to our society. Let's just say the principle of free speech or something like that. These things should be passed down generation to generation, not genuflecting to fashionable subject matter, to what's hot, on the basis of motivation is everything. One could make a similar case for the educational mantra of self-esteem. If everything is good and you're getting a certificate for everything, wow, you're a great listener. Right? Well, guess what? Life isn't like that. life is tough, and there's lots of setbacks and difficulties. And it's not all about self-esteem and feeling good. It's nice to feel good and to give praise, but actually life is lots to manage. It's a difficult, stress-inducing thing. And if your education system is, by and large, promoting kind of a culture of self-esteem or constant affirmation rather than being critical. In America, they're getting rid of grades. Abandoning grades. Now, I understand some of the logic behind that, but one shouldn't abandon meritocracy alongside it, which I fear is what's likely to be, is already happening. There's also a therapeutic turn in our schools, which is basically where, instead of maths and physics and those boring old subjects, curricula is now stuffed full of wellness sessions and diary entries and friendship circles and very therapeutic psychobabble. Now, why does that exist? Because we've spent in the UK and the US billions of pounds on creating a psychological elite, a culture of professional psychologists whose job it is, guess what, to find psychological problems. Right? They didn't exist in these institutions 25, 30 years ago. Now, there's a need for them. Initially, the need was very serious. Okay, some kids are stressed and anxious, and they need that kind of help. Nobody would dispute that. But we've now got a class of psychological elites which find stress and anxiety everywhere. Reading is stressful. Doing exams is stressful. Being present too much can be... Well, guess what? None of these things were ever stressful for generations before. Or if they were, people marched through those problems. It was called school, and you moved through it into the life course. You weren't treated in ways which are kind of like a soft play area on one hand and a psychological counseling session on the other. Now, these things are happening in certain schools. There's lots of people who write about this, Frank Furedi, Dennis Hayes. It's not my ideas. I use their work. Now, the university, okay, one would have hoped that the university would have said, we've got a problem here with the people, the guys and the girls that are graduating from high school and coming to our universities because they're complaining that the workload's too hard or they can't write an essay. Well, what the university should have done was say, okay, it's our job now to adultify them, to drag them into maturity. Well, they didn't do that. They did the opposite. They did what I call, they schoolified university. They made universities more like schools. They dumbed down the reading list. They dampened down the criteria. They turn, in the UK, the lecture is on its way out because it's 50 minutes of concentration. And that way you're taking people away from their digital teat, for 50 minutes. So that's under threat. The university should be the place where you push back against this and say, look, you walk through these doors, look at this around us, right? The knowledge, the long legacy of institutions being places of scientific objectivity, free speech, heterodox opinions. You come here, this is what you're going to get, not double down on what's happened at school and create absurd things that we have in UK universities where if you're an English literature student, you're told there's a trigger warning on fairy tales. Which happened, okay? There's trigger warnings on classic canon literature, all right? You're told if you do war studies degree, that your degree may contain horrific images of war. Well, you think, I mustn't mention this person's name, but he wrote to me, he's a very famous criminologist in the UK, and he has a very successful course on homicide and murder, essentially. And a student wrote to him and said, Dr. X, I would like to do your course, but I'm triggered by the word murder. And so my professor said, well, I think either you adjust or, I can't change the course. And so, I think some people dig their heels in. I like to think I'm one of them, okay? But universities, too often, they're involved in a process called socialization in reverse, which is instead of being confident and dictating the terms of education or androgyny, they instead say, this is what students want, let's give them that. That socialization in reverse is not a good idea. Because if you give them what they want, guess what? It will be perhaps not as robust, perhaps not as serious and objective as you might hope.
And in that reply, I think we already could detect some of your suggestions for how to roll back infantilization, which I don't think is an impossible project.
No. And I think actually, funnily enough, I'm not saying we've reached peak infantilization yet. I think there's still a lot more infantilizing developments to play out, sadly, but hopefully the book will help.
Yeah.
So I did what publishers like. I in the last chapter, it's 10 rules for a more grown-up society. So that's the kind of thing that publishers really like, those kind of things. And so, but of course, what I don't want to do is give you all 10, because then you won't read the book. I'd be, cutting myself off there. But
give us one.
I'll give you a couple. You tell me how the time's doing.
We don't have more time, so you give us...
Okay, well, I mean, first things first is don't make adulthood something that exists always over the horizon, and don't diminish it. Let's talk about adulthood as somewhere that's good to get to, that has huge benefits. Existentially, it's difficult, but it's also fantastic. Let's not always treat adulthood. Let's not always have, every time you mention adulthood or you have a character in a film, let's not have that as a kind of as a symbol of ridicule and anxiety. Adulthood is something that we should embrace and move forward into, and not push back further and further behind the horizon. Don't catastrophize. We live in a world where it's bad. I mean, everyone in this room would say things are not great. I mean, yesterday, the Charlie Kirk shooting, tragic. It's a polarizing moment for the left and the right in America, okay? And, you put on the news, and every time you do so, you hear terrible geopolitical problems. And they are serious. One would never diminish them. But one shouldn't try to live in a world of fear, okay? Children close their eyes and hope that the monsters go away, right? We're adults, we can't do that. We have to build a way out of these problems, okay? Which is don't catastrophize, don't be tribalistic, don't do all the things that our kind of media and our social media is doing to us, pushing us in certain directions. Be adult about it, and don't act like a child with the night terrors. Life is difficult. The world has got serious problems. The only way out for it is for adults to find a way. And I'm really annoyed and really sick of hearing this phrase in politics. I don't know if it's in Danish politics, but in the UK and the US, you'll hear the phrase, the adults are back in the room, or grown-up politics.
It's been known to have been said here.
The more you hear that, you know that's not true. These are not adults, they're infantocrats. These are not the people that are going to guide us out of our problem. They're the ones that have taken us into these things. We need a reboot, right? And we need to look to younger generations and their enthusiasm and their genuine concerns and draw them into the political process in ways that are adult, not emotional, activist kind of, just serious, sensible politics. I go back to what I said about Weber, all right? Politics is problem solving. Not everybody is going to be happy with the solutions. You're going to annoy people, but you need a consensus. You need to build that consensus. And that's the only way out of our problems, right, is that. So don't live in a world of fear. Don't catastrophize. Let's be adult and objective about this. Do you want one
Nope.
more, or we're out of
Nope.
time? Okay. Right.
Thank you. Thank you,
All right.
Keith Hayward.
Great pleasure. Thanks.
Hello.
Hello.
I just wanted to ask you, are you talking about going back to a really nice old world?
No.
Or could you put some words on a modern world that you would like to see, that are different from the old one?
Yeah, it's a good question, because, again, one of the reasons why I wrote this book was I recognized that there was a great deal of interest in people that were selling that message, which I think, talking about. So if we can mention Jordan Peterson, for example, who many of you may have heard about. Jordan Peterson, he's a key figure in the culture wars. His book, I think it's called 10 Lessons for Life. Why am I promoting Jordan Peterson? I think 10 Lessons for Life. I think it sold 4 or 5 million copies. Who did it sell those copies to? It sold those copies to young men, I think, generally speaking. And Peterson's message was, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, make your bed before you change the world. And a very kind of, what you might call an American frontierism, I suppose. And I looked at that and saw lots of other books, actually, that were doing very similar things. So I won't go into these books, but I mentioned them in the book. And they were basically saying, the modern world's kind of bad, and the internet is terrible, right? Which I suppose in a way I've said that a little bit, although I do mitigate that a little bit in the book, I hope. And so there's a sense that we want to drag us back into earlier times. And there's even quite extreme examples of that, isn't there? So you see these TV shows as well, though it's about going off-grid and moving to Alaska and living off a deer for 6 months and things like this. This kind of neo-paganism, there's even a movement in capitalism, a sort of a return to previous eras of capitalism that are not modern. And so I saw all these things existing in our culture, vying for attention, if you will. And I sort of thought, well, what's going on here? And this is really where I think your question is getting at. And I saw these people as, I call them de-infantilization brokers. Because what they're trying to do is they're looking at the world and saying it's terrible, or it's going in the wrong direction. Let's take us back to previous times of respect and the family unit and all those things that, in America it's very dominant in certain Republican circles and so forth. And so I don't want to do that. So I think you might have guessed that's what I was going to say. I don't want to take us back to some earlier time of kind of mythic civility and so forth. However, having said that, I do think we've got big problems with our social contract and our levels of civility in certain parts of the world. And so how do you get out of that? Well, sometimes you have to dredge the past and say what was good, what can we learn from that. And I started by talking about Christopher Lasch, okay? And I'll go back to him here because it's a parallel again. Lasch, after he wrote his book on consumerism and narcissism, wrote a book about the family. And he basically said the family is good. And he was dismissed as a kind of pagan, paleo-conservative for promoting the family. But in a way, there are things about the family that we should celebrate. And perhaps we should be giving tax breaks and things like this. So it's not a question of abandoning modernity and all the things that we have and the internet. It's a question of maybe cherry-picking some of those things from the past, revivifying them for our times, and also recognizing that we have to create a new world, and it's impossible to live in a simulacra of post-war America or post-war Britain. So no, I don't wish to take us back. The book is not a celebration of early eras. If you want to read those books, I mentioned some of them in there. No, it's not like that really. It's about saying, look, let's turn off the tap of this culturally induced infantilization because it's not doing us any good. Be adult. Don't exist in a world of Marvel movies when there's other movies out there that will teach you life lessons that are timeless. Don't read this sugary diet of these books. Go back to the classics. So I do talk about things like that. You're more likely to find a roadmap out of this through the literature of maybe earlier times or the philosophy of earlier philosophers. You're more likely to find a meaningful roadmap in that literature, but it doesn't mean to say that's all you've got to consume. It's about a balance or a mixed suite. So I say in the book, I play video games, I watch zombie movies, right? I do crass, playful things, but it's about a balance, about a mixed suite of things.
Yes. First of all, thank you for a very inspiring analysis.
That's kind of you. Thank you.
I was considering a bit along the same lines, but you're talking about culture, right? But it's maybe also about structure, because I think that, why is this happening? Is it due to structure? And you're talking about advertising, you're talking about social media and clickbait, but actually also in the political sphere, also basically the politics, they make their policy also through clickbait. So there's some kind of, how do you kind of break that structure?
It's a good question. And when you talk about structure, I often think about sort of base structure, Marxist ideas. And so I would say, let's think about economics. Okay? So at the base of a lot of this is economics, all right? People can't afford a house. It's tough out there for young people to get on the housing ladder and to have stable employment. I'm fully aware of this. I make this known. My argument, of course, would be any sane political class would deal with this. They would allow mortgage changes. They would stop private equity companies buying up housing stocks like they are in America and the UK. Governments should rule for the people in their countries. And if you need to help young people out to get on the ladder, one should do these things. So this is an economic issue. So when you talk about structure, I'm thinking about base structure. The economics of this are appalling. Bad infantocrat governments are not doing what they need to do at the economic level to turn this ship around. So, life is difficult and hard for young people. I make that point on several occasions. And we need to do something to reconfigure structure in your words, or economics in mine, to help redress that balance. Now, so I agree with you. Having said that, it's not the first time that it's been difficult for young people in the world, right? I mean, the whole point about history is basically life has been horrible, hard, and you died young, okay? So if you're born in the 1920s, you know, you're going to go through the Great Depression, you're going to go through the Second World War, you're going to go through... It's tough, and it's tough. Keep going back in history, right? It was never an idyllic age, right? It was always difficult struggle for young people. Talk to my father about this. He was going to come tonight, but we discussed not. But he'll tell you how tough it was in England in the 1940s, right? No chance of any material things like a car even. And so this is not a new thing. In those generations, people got their head down and marched into adulthood. What they never did was exist in an elongated teenagerdom. This is the big difference. So yes, structure matters. Yes, economics really matters. But it's up to people to say, life is bad, it's difficult, it's hard, but what I'm not going to do is play with my Lego set and watch and go to Marvel movies and hear the same story over and over again, mummy. I've got to march into adulthood and deal with it. It's difficult, but it's better than retreating into a world of kind of youthful, dominance, where the primacy of youth is everything. Because other generations have also had it structurally and economically difficult. But I am sympathetic. I don't want to dismiss that argument. I am very sympathetic. I mean, a lot of what I say is a critique of the fundamentals of neoliberal capitalism, essentially. You just don't sell that many books when you say that these days. And I'm just kidding. Because it's verbiage, yeah. So yeah, but your point is a very, very good one, and in a way, it's at the bottom of this. Yeah, it's not all about culture. It's not all about Marvel movies. It's not all about pedagogy of motivation. It's some fundamental things that have gone wrong in our society. And that is, unfortunately, one of the kind of consequences of that is what's called generationalism, which is where one generation really loathes the other. So, millennials hate boomers. The phrase, okay, boomer, this phrase, it's like dismissive of boomer, because they had it all, they had all the money, the house at 30, and we haven't got anything. So one generation gets pitted against another. Gen X, which is what I am, doesn't like Gen Z and vice versa. Well, that's just generationalism. That's divide and rule. That sets up each other, one generation against each other. That's no good. That's good for other people. That's good for the market, right? We can't have that. We can't have generations going at each other in this way, right? It's antithetical to building a political consensus.
So I would think one of the reasons why you see the infantilization, especially in the Western world, is because it's possible. That is the way many of us want to live. Yeah. And there are circumstances that has enabled us to live that way, like the welfare state and affluence in general. Yep. And so when you say the market or advertisement politician infantilize us, maybe it's a chicken or the egg. Maybe that is because they know that's the way they get through to us. Yeah. And that's the way we want to be spoken to. And now we have a long period of peace, especially in Europe. And that has somehow maybe led to this being possible. My question is, do you see if things change for the worse in the near future in terms of threats from Russia, for instance, threats from the US maybe even, that somehow we would sober up and consider it, look at this a little differently, like the party is over basically, and we have to be adults.
Yeah. Just taking some notes. So I don't want to mischaracterize your question, because it's a extremely important one. So it's good. That's 3 good questions. So this is very, 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 very interesting to reflect upon. Well, there is a thing. There is a explanation that already exists, which kind of goes against infantilization. It's in the field of developmental psychology, and it's called the concept of emerging adulthood. And it was been promoted and written about at great length by a psychologist called Jeffrey Arnott. And emerging adulthood basically makes a similar point to the one you made at the start of your question, which is this. People are, in my language, infantilized, so that, or as I say in the book, they're living younger longer, or acting younger longer. That's my account in the book. Jeffrey Arnott's account is called Emerging Adulthood. Now, he uses neurological data, brain scan data, to say that the human brain only fully develops much later in life. So initially, they thought the human brain was pretty much developed at around 22, 23. Neurological data is saying that's being pushed back into the 30s. It's controversial. Arne has taken that data and done a series of interviews with American kids, 25 to 30. And he's developed this concept where he believes we should be thinking about an entirely new life stage called emerging adulthood. So if you think about what we have now, infantilized, being an infant, a child, a teenager, okay, an adult, middle-aged, old age, death, right? We stick another life stage into that cycle, and that's, he believes, is called emerging adulthood. And he sees that in a way that you're articulating, which is as a elongated period of self-discovery. Because we're richer, because education takes longer, because more people need education in a service and digital economy. So basically what's happening is that voyage of self-discovery that was previously sort of adolescence, teenagerdom, young adulthood, now you're having this extra life stage, which goes on to 35, where you're still finding yourself, discovering yourself, changing your career, not having kids, not getting married, bouncing around from apartment to apartment. It's a product, as you rightly say, of a wealthy economy, of a very, very expanded higher educational sector, okay, with people doing degree after degree, and all those things. So I think that analysis would chime and resonate with Jeffrey Arnott's account. I disagree with him in many ways. Not least, I disagree with him about the extension of brain development into the 30s, because most of the people in human history would be dead by the time they're 40, and they managed to do quite adult things in previous epochs of human existence. And a lot of developmental psychologists don't like the idea because it's inconsistent. So whilst it's good for America, Denmark, England, Germany, where we had a wealthy economy, what about India, Africa, right? It can't be a developmental stage that's universal if it only applies to certain countries rather than others, okay? Now, there's lots of debate about this in developmental psychology, most of which, I'm not an expert on. I know the basics. And so there is that idea that we're wealthier, healthier, living longer, we're pushing things back. Now, the second part of your question is, I think, the more profound one, which is it going to continue? Or is there going to be a reckoning? And is that reckoning going to come because of the problems we're facing as societies in Europe and elsewhere? Well, this is a good question, and it will challenge the developmental emerging adulthood hypothesis, because somewhere like people may have to fight. I hate to say it, right? Now, in research done in the UK, majority of people say we wouldn't fight for England, young people. Well, you can say that, right? But guess what? It may come to that, and politics doesn't stop because of your opinion or because of what you believe. Politics just carries on, and bad things happen. And so it might well be that the reckoning is coming, and it will challenge the emerging adulthood life stage idea, but it may well, at the same time, shatter the infantilized culture that we've created, or the society has created, very quickly and very, very profoundly, and create a world where young people are thrust into history.
This is such an intense place to stop, Keith, but
yes,
really what I enjoy about it is that you've given everyone here food for thought.
I hope so.
And I want to thank you for that. I also want to mention that it is possible, if someone got tempted, to buy the book, which is right here.
You can buy it in the book in Copenhagen.
And other than that, I just want to say thank you very much for being here, for your very good questions, for listening so attentively, and thank you,
Thank
Keith
you,
Hayward.
Lotte, for sharing.
Yes.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Du har lyttet til Verden forsøgt forklaret. En udsendelse fra Københavns Universitet, udviklet med støtte fra Novo Nordisk Fonden.